Action.
Mr. President, there is a lot of concern all over this country about what's going on in Washington in terms of the possibility that the United States, for the first time in its history, may not pay its debts, and what that means to the American economy, what it means to the world's economy, what it means to the international financial system. And there is a great deal of concern about the possibility that on October 1st, the United States government may shut down because we have some right-wing extremists in the House who want to, among other things, abolish legislation that was passed 4 years ago, the Affordable Care Act, and throw some other things in there. But before I get to those issues, I want to talk about the reality of what is going on in the economy today. And what I want to do is something that is not done often enough, I think, and that is to ask where some of our right-wing colleagues are really coming from. What are their goals? Fine, they want to shut down the government on October 1st, okay. Okay, they don't want to, for the first time in the history of America, pay our bills, okay. But what else do they want? Really, what is this right-wing ideology which has taken over the House? And that is an issue, Mr. President, that I think we just do not talk about as much as we should. But I want to begin my discussion by looking at the reality of what is going on in the American economy. And why people are so angry and frustrated that the government is not responding to their needs. And they have every reason to be angry. The Census Bureau just reported the other day a rather extraordinary fact, very depressing fact, and that is in terms of median family income, what the typical American family right in the middle of our economy is experiencing is that family made less money last year than it did 24 years ago. 24 years, come and gone, people have worked so hard, and after 24 years they're now earning less money as a family than they did back in 1989. Further, what the Census Bureau told us is that the typical middle-class family has seen its income go down by more than $5,000 since 1999 after adjusting for inflation. So people angry in New Mexico? They're angry in California? That's why they're angry. They're working hard. Their income is going down. The average male worker made $283 less last year than he did 44 years ago. How's that for progress? Less money last year, male worker, than 44 years ago. Average female worker earned $1,700 less last year than she did in 2007. Going down. Record-breaking 46.5 million Americans are living in poverty now. We have the highest rate of childhood poverty in the industrialized world at almost 22%. A higher percentage of American kids live in poverty now than was the case in 1965. In other words, we are moving, but we are moving in the wrong direction. Meanwhile, people on top, wealthiest people in this country, doing phenomenally well. And that's the major point that has to be made over and over again. This is not an earthquake or a tsunami that has hit everybody. We're all in this together. Everybody is struggling. Not the case. Wealthiest people doing phenomenally well. Last week, we learned that 95% of the new income generated in this country from 2009 to 2012 went to the top 1%. That is a phenomenal statistic. All of the new income generated, 95% of it went to the wealthiest 1%. Earlier this week, Forbes magazine reported that the wealthiest 400 Americans in this country are now worth a record-breaking $2 trillion. You can do the arithmetic. That is just an extraordinary concentration of wealth in this country that we have not seen since before the Great Depression. The richest 400 Americans now own more wealth than the bottom half of America, over 150 million Americans. One family, and I This is not what I learned in the history books when I was growing up about what America was supposed to be like, but one family, Walton family, owner of Walmart, owned more wealth than the bottom 40% of the American people. Corporate profits are at an all-time high, while wages as a share of the economy are at a record low. Wall Street, whose greed, recklessness, and illegal behavior caused this massive economic downturn, well, their CEOs, their executives are doing phenomenally well. In fact, CEOs on Wall Street are on track to make more money this year than they did in 2009. Believe me, they have recovered. They are doing just great, while the middle class of this country is disappearing. So that, Mr. President, is an overview of the reality facing our country. Middle class disappearing, poverty at an all-time high, people on top doing phenomenally well. Now I want to go from that reality to tell you what right-wing extremism is really about, and it is much more than shutting down the government. It's much more than not paying the debts that we owe and causing a major financial crisis. Mr. President, let me suggest to you what I think you already know, that if you really delve into what some of our colleagues here in the Senate, but mostly in the House, believe, what they believe is forget the Affordable Care Act. They want to repeal that. That's nickels and dimes. What these guys really are about is repealing every significant piece of legislation passed in the last 80 years, which protect the needs of the middle class, working families, the elderly, the kids, lower-income people. You name the piece of legislation, they either want to repeal it entirely or they want to make massive cuts in those programs. And let me name what those programs are. Social Security. Some of them believe Social Security is unconstitutional. It's not just they want to cut Social Security. They don't believe in the concept of Social Security. Same thing with health care on the part of the federal government. Medicare, Medicaid. Why should the federal government be involved in those programs? That's not the federal government's role. Let's abolish Medicare, abolish Medicaid. So if you are 70 years of age and you don't have a lot of money and you don't have any health insurance, which Medicare provides, well, what happens to you? You tell me, Mr. President. What happens if you're 70 and you're diagnosed with cancer and you don't have health insurance? Everybody knows the end of the story. You die. Well, that's the way life goes, because we're all in it for ourselves. We don't believe the government should provide health insurance to all people. So if I'm a multimillionaire and I get sick or my kids get sick, I've got the best health care in the world. But if I'm struggling middle-class person, working-class person, lower-income people, hey, government should not be involved in those areas. Minimum wage, Many of us believe, and the overwhelming majority of the American people believe, that the minimum wage today, at about $7.25 an hour, federal minimum wage, is too low. And I want to applaud the governor and the legislature in California for raising their minimum wage to $10 an hour. But right now we're at about $7.25 for the federal government. Do you know what most of our colleagues here believe? It's not just that they are opposed to raising the minimum wage. They want to abolish the concept of the minimum wage. That's the fact. American people don't know that. And what does that mean? It means that if you are living in a high unemployment area where a lot of people are struggling for a few jobs and an employer says, well, you know what? Best I can pay you is $3.50 an hour. That's what I can pay you. Well, I have to take that. I have to take that. And people think I'm kidding. I am not kidding. A majority of the Republicans, to the best of my knowledge, now believe in abolishing the concept of the minimum wage. Environmental protection. We have made some real progress in recent years. Not enough, but we have made some progress. Go to New York City, air is cleaner. Go to California, Los Angeles, air is cleaner. We've cleaned up a lot of rivers. What we have said to companies, you can't just put your crap and your toxins into rivers, into waterways. You can't put it up in the air so that the kids breathe it. We have made some progress in that. Some of our Republican friends say, oh, it's not that we're just opposed to this or that piece of legislation. Let's abolish the EPA. Let's abolish the ability of the American people to protect their health. Now, let me just quote something, Mr. President, and I can quote a lot of sources, quote many of the statements made by some of my colleagues. But I want to go to the platform of the 2012 Texas Republican Party. Now, why do I want to go there? Because, in fact, Texas is a large state. The Republican Party in Texas is very powerful. But also the ideas that come from Texas, to be fair to the state of Texas, end up spreading all over this country, especially in Republican circles. So I want to read you some of the proposals in the 2012 Texas Republican Party platform. Texas, one of our largest states, controlled by Republicans right now. Quote, "We support an immediate and orderly transition to a system of private pensions based on the concept of individual retirement accounts and gradually phasing out the Social Security tax." End of quote. In English, what that means is we believe in the privatization of Social Security, and people, if they have the money, can invest on Wall Street or do what they want. But that's the Texas Republican Party platform. What else do they say? And I want veterans, and I speak as chairman of the Veterans Committee, to listen to this one. Quote, "We support the privatization of veterans' health care." End of quote. In other words, they would abolish the Veterans Administration. Well, we've got some 6 million veterans today getting pretty good health care at the VA, and one of the mainstreams of right-wing extremism in this country, the Texas Republican Party, believes that we should abolish the VA health care system. Furthermore, what they are saying is that we support abolishing all federal agencies whose activities are not specifically enumerated in the Constitution, including the Department of Education and the Department of Energy. Goodbye, Department of Education. Goodbye, federal aid to education, Title I, and many other important programs that are supporting public education in America. Goodbye. We oppose mandatory kindergarten, end of quote. Okay? Right now, it is widely regarded that the United States has the worst early childhood education system of any major country on earth. People can't find affordable early childhood education. Their proposal is to abolish mandatory kindergarten. We believe, and I said this earlier, the Environmental Protection Agency should be abolished. No problem. Your company, you want to put toxins into the rivers, into the lakes, into the air, go for it, because we got no agency that is going to stop you. Quote, "We recommend repeal of the 16th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution with the goal of abolishing the IRS and replacing it with a national sales tax collected by the states." End of quote. In English, what that means is what they want to do is move to regressive taxes, ending all forms of progressive taxation. So they want working people, middle-class people to pay more in taxes while the wealthy pay less. We favor abolishing the capital gains tax and the estate tax, which, of course, falls most heavily on wealthy people. And here's what they say, and I got to give these guys credit. They're up front. They put this in paper. We believe the minimum wage law should be repealed. So there we go. People in America will now work for $3 or $4 an hour if that's what the circumstances require. Now, that's, and I point out, as I said earlier, going to the Texas Republican Party platform, and I could have gone elsewhere, but the ideas that come from them end up filtering among right-wing circles all over America. Now, interestingly enough, at a time when the middle class is disappearing and the wealthy and large corporations are doing phenomenally well, it is important to hear what the CEOs of the largest Wall Street banks and corporations in this country, the Business Roundtable, have to say on the economy. Wall Street bailed out by the middle class in this country, corporate America enjoying record-breaking profits. Earlier this year, the Business Roundtable, again, these are the CEOs of the major corporations in America, without exception, these guys are making millions of dollars a year in income. They have wonderful retirement packages, health care benefits for them and their family. This is what they have to say. They came to Washington and they called on Congress to raise the eligibility age of Social Security and Medicare to the age of 70. 70. Wall Street billionaires, CEOs making huge amounts of money, wonderful retirement packages, they now want Congress to raise the retirement age of Social Security and Medicare to age 70. They want to cut Social Security and veterans' benefits, their COLAs. They want to raise taxes on working families, and obviously, it goes without saying, cut taxes for the largest corporations in America at a time when 1 out of 4 of these corporations doesn't pay a nickel in taxes. That's the background. Middle class collapsing, rich getting richer. And then we have a right wing in this country fueled by people like the Koch brothers and others who are pushing a totally reactionary agenda. Now, let's talk about what that immediate agenda looks like in terms of the CR, continuing resolution, that in fact, and this is what's going to pass in the House as I understand it, that would lock in place sequestration for domestic programs while providing a $20 billion boost to defense spending for the next 3 months. That's annualized, looking at it from a year's perspective. Now, if we did that for a year, that sequestration level, according to the Congressional Budget Office, sequestration will lead to the loss of 900,000 jobs and cause a 0.7% drop in the GDP. Real unemployment today is close to 14%, and what sequestration for a year would do is result in the loss of some 900,000 jobs at exactly the time we don't need it. Many of the jobs lost will be government jobs, but that should come as no surprise because the extreme right wing really does not believe in the concept of government. So when we lose jobs at the teaching profession, when we lose police officers and firefighters and construction workers and VA nurses and VA doctors and scientists or engineers, that is no problem for some of these fellows. Mr. President, sequestration, we should be clear, has already caused enormous pain for millions of Americans. As I mentioned earlier, this country is way behind our global competitors in terms of child care, early childhood education. As a result of sequestration, more than 57,000 kids are losing access to Head Start and early Head Start programs. At a time when food insecurity is skyrocketing, and when millions and millions of parents are wondering how they're going to be able to feed their kids, what the sequestration does is literally goes after some of the most vulnerable people in this country, who are elderly people, low income, living on minimal Social Security benefits, who can't even leave their homes. And they are served right now by the Meals on Wheels program, and I want to thank all of the Meals on Wheels volunteers out there for doing a great job and trying to help these seniors. Sequestration will continue major cuts in throwing thousands and thousands of seniors off the Meals on Wheels program. We have a serious housing crisis in America. Sequestration will make it harder for over 100,000 families to get a variety of affordable housing programs. Everybody knows the cost of college education is soaring. Working-class families can't afford college today, and yet sequestration would result in 70,000 college students losing federal work-study grants. That's the means by which they earn some money to help stay in college. Sequestration will result in cutting back on chemotherapy treatments to thousands of cancer patients because of a 2% cut to Medicare providers. Low-income heating assistance program, very important in the state of Vermont where it gets cold, massive cuts. Long-term unemployment checks, unemployment remains high, 10% cut, that will be continued. So that is where we are right now. And it gets worse. It gets worse if the Boehner CR is approved. Programs that millions of Americans rely on will be cut even further. So everything I told you will get even worse. So, Mr. President, I think what we are looking at right now is not just the immediate pain of the continuing resolution or the threat not to pay our debts and destroy the credit rating of the United States of America. Those are enormous realities. But what we are looking at is a real effort to dismember the United States government and wreak havoc on the lives of tens and tens and tens of millions of people. And to my mind, what we have got to do is exactly the opposite of what our right-wing friends are suggesting. They are suggesting that we should raise unemployment. They are suggesting that we should cut back on federal funding for infrastructure. I believe that we should be investing billions and billions of dollars in addressing our crumbling infrastructure, roads, bridges, water systems, wastewater plants, our rail system. And when we do that, we make this country more productive and we create millions of jobs. I believe we have got to invest significantly in energy efficiency and sustainable energy. And when we do that, we not only protect the environment, combat global warming, but we also create jobs. I believe that we have to rewrite our disastrous trade policies so that American jobs are not our #1 export. I believe that instead of further deregulation of Wall Street has got to be effectively regulated so that their greed and recklessness can no longer cause enormous problems for our economy. Instead of lowering taxes for the wealthiest people, I think it's high time they started paying their fair share of taxes. So what we are involved in here is a great, great debate which goes beyond the continuing resolution, goes beyond the shutdown of the government. It goes beyond whether or not the United States fails to pay its bills for the first time in history. I believe that what we have is an ideology, a right-wing ideology, which reflects at most the views of 15% of the American people. I think it's probably a generous perspective. I think the vast majority of the American people do not believe what right-wing extremism is doing, and it's high time we began to stand up and say to these people that if you're going to continue those efforts, you may not be back here in the United States Congress. And with that, Mr. President, I would yield the floor.